Welcome to our podcast, This Life, the Chronicles of Autism Mums. I'm Alison and I'm joined each week by amazing women who happen to have children on the spectrum. We talk about navigating the ups and downs of parenting kids with autism and how that affected us and our lives as women, professionals and mothers. Strap in, grab some tissues. Sometimes you'll cry from empathy and others from laughter. Join us on our journey of This Life. Hi everybody and welcome to this episode of This Life podcast. I'm Alison and I'm joined today by Moira and Huma. Hello ladies. Hello. It's nice to see you. Today we're going to be having a little bit of an unusual discussion because when I was thinking about the topic for this podcast and this episode, I was feeling a little jaded and frustrated, I think, by Noah's diagnosis, but not in the sense that I was frustrated with him, more in the sense that I felt that I felt like the communication that I was having with others about Noah were things that I shouldn't have to be telling them over and over and over and over and over again. So this can be from a professional that works with him in education, in any of the therapy disciplines that he attends. It could be, a sport that he does, or just being, kind of somewhere out in public. So I think what I wanted to do with this episode is talk about, firstly, the things that we wish we knew about our kids. Because I think if we had the hindsight and also the knowledge to know more about what our kids are thinking and the angle that they come from on some things, so that we understand more about their thought process and the actions that they take sometimes and the behaviour that they present with us sometimes. Obviously, there's always a reason for it, and there's often a good reason for it, that they can't communicate or, they can't channel. And how we can go about understanding them better and how we wish that we could understand. We wish a lot of things, but how we can wish that we can understand them better, because it's all kind of really down to the fact that society often tries, to a point, understand our kids, accept our kids, integrate our kids. But, it's just always the point and the fact that, if we don't understand our own kids, being the enigmas that they are, the wonderful enigmas that they are, and as they're all so different, how are we, it just baffles me as to how we're going to get to a point in society where, they are, we have an inclusive society for them and we don't have to justify their actions or behaviours or whatever. So this is not going to be a Debbie Downer topic, by the way, for anybody who's listening, but it's the reality of, our children. And I think, I feel quite grateful that a lot of the time that Noah is, he's not consciously thinking about the things that I think about, which I feel quite happy about sometimes, because it's quite heavy. And the topic of autism and how it presents itself and, how we navigate society, on behalf of our children a lot of the time is difficult. And it weighs heavy on my heart sometimes, and I'm sure it does for you guys as well. So, I think, Moira, we were talking before we started recording, and you made a really, really good point about how, society and, people that know our children, how we wish they knew more, so that, it could ease certain situations. But you said something quite interesting.
Well, how can we expect them to know when I don't really understand an awful lot?
Right.
The thing with Callum is he's extremely verbal, but he doesn't actually communicate So he talks a lot, and occasionally he can tell you things, and he's very good at saying what he wants to do and what he doesn't want to do, but he doesn't actually properly communicate. You can't have a proper back and forth conversation. So you don't actually know what's going on in his head or how aware he is of a situation or how involved he is or if he's listening to a conversation. And so it's probably quite confusing for other people who see that he can talk.
So then the assumption is that if he can talk...
The assumption is that he can understand and he can engage, and obviously he can up to a point, and when he wants to, he can do a lot more, but the baseline is probably quite low.
So the assumption is that if he can communicate, then he is, and he seems more aware of what's around him. So then, I'm thinking perhaps that, certain behaviours or, what we were talking about in previous episodes about storytelling and things like that are looked on in a different way because they feel that he's maybe perhaps more in control of himself.
Possibly, but I think, even for any child, those kind of behaviours should just be looked over. If they're telling a story, if they're flapping their hands, if they're doing whatever it is,
just in his own zone at that time.
Just let it go and don't make a deal of it. The tricky thing is when somebody maybe tries to talk to him, and I know I've mentioned before, you can give out a standard response and it might fit the topic, by chance.
Yeah.
And they might be quite happy with that and wander off, or it might not, and they'll be like, oh, that's not what I said. And they've got no way of knowing that even if he is actually looking at them and giving them an answer, that he has got any idea of what they've just said to him. And I constantly have to do it. You have to shout, or you have to snap, or you have to get a hold of his face and repeat what I just said to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to make sure that you, so for you as a parent who is with him, the majority of the hours of the day, and I think we all have a special way of communicating with our children. From children that talk a lot, but differing levels of comprehension, and responses that not necessarily anybody from outside of their circle might necessarily understand, as you say, to Haider, who has a greater comprehension, but still, you'll find that it's,
there will be times when it's like that I have to repeat a certain thing, because then, he'll be in his own zone. And then I said, Haider, you have to do this and this and this. And I'm, because I'm not sure whether the message got through. I said, Haider, tell me what you have to do. And he'll be like, I have to do this, this, this. Because, I cannot be sure 100% because there's a story going on in his head and whether he received the message or not. Yeah. So there's always some like movie playing, and I can understand. So I rely on my younger son. I said, Suleiman, go make sure Haider's doing this. So, you ask.
And do you think that within our community of parents of children with autism, obviously, I know our 3 boys, I know your boys, and I know my own son. And I see, and we always say, and we always talk about this, is the fact that the way that autism presents in 3 of our children is so very, very different. It could be that they have a totally different diagnosis. Do you know what I mean? It's so, so very different. And it still surprises me now, even with, autism parent to autism parent, there can sometimes be a level of anxiety between parent to parent to parent, just depending on, different behaviours and, different levels of communication, and, how nervous parents are about their children being around each other. And I've actually been seeing that this week, just in a few parents that I've met along the way. And do you feel like we should just have an ultimate kind of bond? You know, there should be a bond between all autism parents to kind of understand each other's child, or at least, you know, try and have a level of empathy, or, you know, what are your experiences of that, Huma?
Well, you know, in a perfect world, everyone would understand everyone's.
But it's so hard to do that, isn't it? Because we don't even understand, you know, a lot of the time. So
I don't think you
expecting
need
somebody
to even understand it. Just
I guess
be cool with whatever's happening. Unless
acceptance.
there's a safety issue, then just let it.
You know, acceptance, compassion. It's just, you know, it's hard. You know, there will be moments like I mentioned before.
Tell us your experience of being introduced to the
child.
lady.
Yes,
yeah, exactly.
So, you know, initially when my son was diagnosed, so another parent reached out, and she was in the same situation. Her son was also on the spectrum, and the community is so small, so she wanted to reach out. She was like, "Oh, finally, so our kids can get to know each other." And I said, "Okay, fine." So we met at a neutral place, another friend's home, and so that other friend, she said, "Okay, you know, that's actually my neighbor. She will bring her son." I said, "Okay, fine. You know, maybe our kids can play together." But the son was much older, much more enthusiastic. And my introduction was that, like, there was a huge toy car, the car that in which you actually can sit and you can drive the car, that came flying and it hit the wall, and there was a huge bang, and that was my introduction to the child. And I was, you know, and your default setting as a parent is suddenly you become protective. It's like, oh my God, this is not the right setting for my child. Of course, I didn't say anything, but I could see the mother was embarrassed, and she quickly took her son and she left. And by the time I got my wits together, and by the time, you know, initially I was like, oh, thank God, you know, I'm not in that situation anymore. But later on, I was like, oh, what much she must be feeling that, oh, she tried to reach out to someone, it did not go well. I felt really bad for her, and I still think about her to this day, that, you know, how difficult it must be for her to, you know, just navigate these things, the social element that, you know, the simple thing that your child having a friend, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting that even as autism parents, we find somebody who's got a child with, he can be friends with mine. That was going to happen.
Exactly.
Even with neurotypical children, it's not going to happen.
But, I mean,
it's the parent that wants to be friends with the parent.
And that's the interesting point, I think, isn't it? It's just to find somebody that you're relaxed with, that you're like-minded with, and you don't have to worry too much about how your child, you know, their behaviours. And I say that like that because they shouldn't be seen like that. You know, you know, as long as nobody's, you know, in danger or whatever, then they shouldn't be perceived as anything other than, you know, regular play. Yeah. But unfortunately, we are in the society that we're in. But there's two interesting points there. One, I think the first one is that she initiated an interaction between the boys because she obviously felt that it would be nice to have a friend that she could relate to, and vice versa. Yeah. And also the boys potentially could have kind of quite a relaxed relationship without you having to worry about, you know, perhaps what other people were, you know, how Haider needed to react in front of certain kids. Yeah. So have you experienced that before yourself, Moira, with anybody that is, apart from me, who, you know, you and I are friends, and, you know, our boys have been kind of playing together for a long time. And I say that
But you say
loosely,
that, they've occupied the same space.
They do occupy the same space.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's, if you put two children together that have got, you know, an autism diagnosis, then, you know, the odds of them actually becoming friends are actually quite low sometimes, just based on the fact that, you know, they, in a lot of cases, and I am generalizing here, I mean, especially with our boys, that they do struggle with communication. Yeah. So you're quite right that it is, you know, for the parents. So I think that, can you, you know, do you see that you've kind of migrated to
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, when we first started out, our friendship circle centred around Orla's friends and parents. But I was drawn towards
me.
You. And everyone who could relate to what we were going through.
And this is the thing,
early stages.
and that's right. And it goes back to society, really. Yeah. And it's not, and I think unless we put ourselves in that situation,
that's no fault.
No, it's not. Exactly.
Why would you expect them to?
Exactly, it's not. And I think this is a testament to the friends that I have that have known Noah since he was born and since he was a baby, that are here with us. And I feel very, very relaxed around them and their kids. Our group of friends that we've had since the older children have been like 3. Yeah. I would have absolutely no issue with, us all getting together, and I wouldn't even get up and think, well, where's Noah? What's he doing? Because he would just be with the other children, because they've already been exposed, for want of a better word. So, there's no unusual behaviour. And I say behaviour because I don't really know how else to describe it.
It's just Noah.
It's just him.
I know.
And
same,
that's okay.
Same here.
But, introducing, as the kids get older, as our groups of friends change, it's a very transient place. That, I've talked about in previous podcasts, that we always have, that kind of period of time where we kind of build up to, introducing people to Noah. And it sounds awful when I talk about it, because it sounds like he's, I don't know, from another planet. And we adore him, but for the fact that we are in a society that we're in for whatever reason. And also, I think a lot of it is down to my own anxiety about it, and just making sure that everyone's happy and everyone's comfortable, and we don't alienate anybody.
You don't want your child to be judged.
No, exactly. And that's exactly it. But the other point I wanted to make, which was really interesting from what you have just said about the car situation hitting the wall, is the fact that it's still very interesting to hear from parents like us that, do you think that that's how other parents of neurotypical children see our children a lot of the time, if
definitely.
they see unusual behaviour? So the shoe's kind of on the other foot, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've had... How
long have we got?
I know, no one will say it to my face, but I know parents have, taken their kids away or taken their kids back.
And how do you know that?
You can sense it.
They blocked you from there. Group of simple Alison.
No, sometimes they would accidentally, say it out loud. Something will happen. They'll be like, "Oh, stop it!" Their reaction will come out because it was an instinctive. But then I would realize, okay, you know what? We're not wanted here, so let's take a step back, because I don't want to put my family and my children in a position where they're not welcomed. Right. So I would take a step back. So it would affect.
So I was going to say, so how did that make you feel? Firstly.
It feels horrible.
I think it's quite obvious, but how would that? Yeah,
it feels horrible because you feel rejected, you feel misunderstood, you feel because you're thinking that he's not that bad, he was just playing, it's not gonna hurt anyone. But from their perspective, they're like, oh, you know what, we don't want to deal with whatever you're dealing with. Right. Our kid is typical. We don't have any issues. Why should we involve ourselves in your drama or something? That's what I'm thinking that they're thinking.
So that's what you're thinking. Yeah. That they're thinking, not necessarily what they are thinking, but this is what we
Now I'm thinking, I wonder if my friends were thinking.
Because because I know it's you can get the vibes. I've been ignoring vibes for many years because I'm like, oh, Huma, give everyone the benefit of doubt. Everyone has goodness inside. Let's just be positive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm done now, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not getting good energy from this place. I don't, you get the vibes, you get the feeling. So I'm like, you know what? I don't want to be around, or I don't want my kids to be around this person.
Okay. So, if you have been in situations like that before, and I think we probably all have to a point, I think it depends on what level you've chosen to immerse yourself in certain situations and kind of go gung-ho and think, do you know what? This has to work. I'm going to be positive about this, and I am going to not care. I'm not going to worry. I'm just going to go in, and we're just going to deal with whatever happens. If, for me, I think we've kind of avoided some situations like that because I just don't have the stomach for it sometimes. And I think it just depends on the day for me as to, if I wake up and feel, certainly like years ago now, for me it's, not such a big thing anymore. But when, and I think for me at the time, I think I was still so, like going back 4 or 5 years ago, it was so raw for me, Noah's diagnosis still. Not in the sense that the diagnosis was raw, but I think I was still very, very upset about the fact that every time he was with other children, he wasn't playing like the other kids were. And that really, really upset me. Yeah. And that might sound selfish, it might sound crude or ridiculous, but I just felt very sad about that because, one, I think it's, the child doesn't know, but I think anyone can relate to that's in our situation, or at least, many people can. So at that time, I think I was battling myself because I was trying to kind of stay upbeat and trying to do the best for, everybody in our family. But ultimately, I was kind of wanting to remove myself from the situation because I didn't think I was strong enough, I don't think, to kind of put myself into the situation and then have that happen. I don't think I was at that point where I could have accepted that or moved on from that very quickly.
I used to be envious of kids who, he would attract friends that, and I was like, for a long time, I was on this mission that he should have friends and, like pushing him and putting him in situations where he would have, typical or, otherwise, any kind of friend. And I remember, after we were in that stage where I had to, wherever he would have a meltdown, I was supposed to record it, and I had to send the video to my therapist, and it was a painful experience because my child is crying and he's turning away from the camera, and I have to record him, and I don't want it. It's like chasing an animal, So I hated that, and that was the only time I did it. And I said, Muhammad, I cannot do it. I'm not going to do this anymore. So anyway, it's like, so whenever there would be a not so successful play date, and so he would run crying home, and he would go back to his tablet, and he would say, Mommy, technology is my friend. Technology will not hurt me, So
he was being affected by those.
So he was aware.
Yeah. So he's like, friends, friends, it can hurt you, but my tablet will not hurt me. So I just sort of, it was heartbreaking. I said, I just gave up. I said, it's okay, Haider, go play on your tablet. It's
because what that lady was trying to do was obviously instigate that kind of friendship as well, because she was feeling like, and I think now that our kids are older, we've kind of got to a point where, some of them obviously really desire and want that friendship, and it's trying to nurture that and kind of find and them to kind of find people that can relate to them and everything else. And I really hope that at some point that Noah's in that situation, but I think that they do, our boys, I think they they do exist in the same space, but they do kind of support each other, but on a very different level. But what I just feel that, you know, even within our kind of community of mums and dads and whatever, that there is still that need for justification. It just goes back to the fact that we're justifying ourselves to our peers, you know, that are in the same kind of situation to us. I was saying to Moira before the podcast started that there's somebody that I was talking to yesterday, and her son was next to Noah, and he started touching Noah's arm like this, and she was just like, I'm so sorry, and I was just like, it's okay. You know, and you know, if there was something. And then Noah turned around to him and just gave him a kiss on the cheek. And then I was like, I'm sorry. I was like, oh, you know, and it just goes back to your original point, which is we shouldn't be apologizing for our children. And I'm not apologizing. What I'm doing is I'm making sure that the other person is okay with my child's behavior. Does that make sense? So
we should just say that instead of saying sorry. Yeah. Just say, is that okay?
Exactly. Yeah, well, it's off now because he's done it. Can we set some boundaries
Can
here?
you do that again or no?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think we're quite British about it, but I know. But it's just interesting to be able to justify that in our own circles of people, you know, that in theory should understand, but at what point and what level? I'm going quite deep here with my conversation because I think it's a very complex circle, and we can make it as complex or not as we like. But you know, ultimately, in the next episode, what I want to talk more about is, you know, acceptance, and you know, just that whole level of somebody like just not even looking around at somebody doing something that, you know, perhaps most children don't do, because that's the thing that affects them, and it affects us the most, and it affects us kind of moving forward and kind of evolving. And
the other thing is, going back to the boy touching Noah's arm, you probably didn't need to say anything. Let Noah decide if it's something,
exactly.
if it's okay, and he's perfectly capable of no thank you, or being fine with it. And then parents just back off.
Yeah, exactly.
Let them deal with it.
But I think that at the time she was so, you know, I might not be happy. And, you know, and then we had another conversation this morning just about the fact that we assume that because, and the same, a lot of people, the same for Noah as well, because he is, he's not nonverbal, but he can't always express himself or have like a full-on conversation. Well, he can't have a full-on conversation. And to anybody outside of our circle, you know, we know how he communicates. So, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys, where you know, you can very often tell just by a few words what it is that, you know, what the problem might be or what they want or whatever. That, you know, and from the outside looking in, very often, and quite rightly so, if somebody's not speaking, we see communication as a means of understanding what somebody wants, what their needs are, you know, where they're going to go next, what they're going to do, whatever. So if they're upset. So if they can't do that, then I think people assume, even to a point where, you know, a parent of an autistic child who has vocabulary and has communication and one that doesn't, you might think that they haven't, maybe they're not able to have that same thought process or think about things. And one thing that she said to me this morning was fascinating, because he's very nonverbal, this boy I'm talking about, and he was saying, oh, I don't want to go to school today. But he didn't say it like that in a sentence, but he was very clear that on Monday he was not going to school. And she, you know, she was like, well, that's up to you. You know, if you really don't want to go to school, that's fine. But don't think you're going to stay here and play the iPad and, you know, put the TV on, because, you know, we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be doing, like, I don't know, something far more boring at home. And then by 9 o'clock in the morning, he'd turn around and go, right, okay, let's go to school. And then this morning, he'd queued up outside of school, and he was like telling his mum in the morning, I want to go early this morning. I want to go. And for me, it's like, well, you know, the intricacies and the, you know, that kind of communication that doesn't come through like in a verbal way is so different to for us and for kids that, you know, because we know our kids, and, you know, she knew her son very well, so she could figure that out. For people from looking from the outside in, how complicated must that be? You know, and how difficult can that be? You know, and that is the reason why I think, you know, there are so many frustrations, and there isn't this level of understanding that we all need and, you know, we want so much.
Yes, no, that's true. That's true. It's, and, you know, I guess, you know, maybe we're expecting too much from the society, maybe because until and unless you're not in this situation yourself and you haven't dealt with it firsthand, you don't know how complicated it can be. Just, you know, just dealing with a typical child is complicated. Just dealing with someone who has additional needs can be extra complicated.
Extra. I like that. Extra.
Just extra.
You know,
I met hashtag extra.
I met this. I took my kids to a jiu-jitsu class in my attempt to make them more active, and you know, so. The instructor there, the girl, and she one day so I was just washing my hands in the toilet, and she was doing her hair, and she said, "Is that your boy, the tall one?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "He's autistic?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm also autistic." And she said, my mother and my sister, we're all on the spectrum. And she was from Brazil. And she said, when I saw your son, I knew. And she said, before, you know, I didn't even, it was too much for me talking to people, dealing with kids, just coming here for the job. It was just too much. But now it helps me. She said, I come here, it helps me. I do the class, I do the coaching. And she said, but when I go home, I go to my room, I put my headphones on, I listen to my music, I don't want to talk to anyone. So I saw her as a functioning member of the society, and I was like, oh, this is lovely. And, you know, she of course, she recognized the signs, and she understood my son, which was, you know, it was nice to see that, you know, but she had been through that, so she understood him. And I mean, maybe it's too much to expect from other people who haven't been in that. So yeah, that was just the thing that just came to my mind. I wanted to share that.
It's interesting. So we'll be talking and exploring more about this topic in the next episode. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining this live podcast brought to you by Learn Autism. To learn more about autism, check out their website at learnautism.com. You can download this podcast wherever you find your favourites, and if you prefer to watch us, all links are below in the description. See you next week, and thanks for listening.